A husband, brimming with joy, bought a beautiful brooch, ready to surprise his pregnant wife. But her words froze him in his tracks. She had terminated the pregnancy. Her reason? An upcoming audition for a prime-time anchor position at a major television network. She reasoned that she could always have another child. But this career opportunity was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Devastated, the husband uttered one last sentence before leaving. "I wish I'd never met you." Their relationship effectively ended that day. Following this heartbreaking event, Hai-Ran landed the coveted prime-time anchor role. Her striking beauty, sharp wit, and commanding presence propelled her to win the Best Anchor Award 5 years in a row. She became a national icon, dubbed the nation's goddess. But this success came at a steep price: her family's sacrifice. 5 years passed with barely a civil word exchanged between Hai-Ran and her husband, Tae-wook. Intimacy was a distant memory. Whenever she attempted to reconcile, Tae-wook's response was always the same: "I won't ask anything of you, and you don't ask anything of me. All I can do is wait for you to leave me. This is the responsibility I bear for choosing you." Despite pouring her heart and soul into her career, Hai-Ran was still just a woman. Late at night, in the quiet solitude, intimate images would flash through her mind. But the man in those images wasn't her husband. Hai-Ran received her 6th Best Anchor Award. However, this year, amidst the congratulations, a new sentiment emerged. Hai-Ran is getting old. It's time for a new face. The very next day, a new co-anchor appeared alongside Hai-Ran on her previous solo show. She knew this newcomer was a potential replacement, and she wasn't going down without a fight. Knowing her sacrifices to reach this pinnacle, she confronted the network director. To her dismay, he confirmed that he was indeed grooming the new anchor, intending for Hai-Ran to step aside gracefully. The network, he explained, needed a fresh perspective. But then, a twist of fate. A man named Kelvin won the World Golf Championship in the US. This seemingly unrelated event would drastically change the course of Hai-Ran's story. The network director desperately wanted an exclusive interview with Kelvin. But despite numerous attempts, other networks had failed to secure one. He was at his wit's end. Seeing her opportunity, Hai-Ran proposed a bold plan. She would personally secure the exclusive interview with Kelvin. Her tireless efforts, however, came with a steep price: a guaranteed return to her prime time slot, and the reassignment of her ambitious young rival, Ji-won. Under immense pressure from higher-ups, the director agreed. But with a stern warning: failure meant Hai-Ran's immediate dismissal. The truth was, Hai-Ran had no idea what Kelvin even looked like. Yet in her mind, no task was insurmountable. Just like years ago, when she hadn't hesitated to terminate her pregnancy, she believed she could overcome any obstacle. At that moment, Ji-won, the very rival she aimed to displace, entered the room. After washing her hands, Ji-won deliberately flicked water at Hai-Ran, a blatant act of provocation. She taunted Hai-Ran about her age, suggesting she retire, claiming no one wanted a wrinkled, out-of-shape anchor. Ji-won's words struck a nerve. Looking at her aging reflection in the mirror, Hai-Ran felt a surge of anger, followed by a wave of loneliness and isolation. Beneath the glittering city lights, she felt utterly alone, with no one to lean on. Her husband was just a wall away, but the barrier between them felt insurmountable. Before dawn, Hai-Ran's assistant called with urgent news. Kelvin was en route back to the country, and other networks were mobilizing. Without a moment to spare, Hai-Ran rushed out. But Tae-wook stopped her. Hai-Ran's mother had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Doctors gave her only hours to live and urged the family to say their final goodbyes. Hai-Ran froze, stunned. After a brief hesitation, she made a heartless decision. She couldn't go, she declared. Her presence wouldn't change the inevitable. Tae-wook was incredulous. Was her career more important than her mother's? Hai-Ran offered no further explanation and turned to leave. On her way to the airport, she repeated a mantra to herself, trying to justify her choice. Even if she went, her mother would still die. This opportunity to meet Kelvin, however, was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Distraught and preoccupied, she stumbled through the airport in a daze. Lost in thought, she tripped over a suitcase and fell. A kind stranger helped her up. As she focused on his face, she gasped. A flood of memories rushed back. A rainy night, her boyfriend waiting for her on the way home. She had dumped him because he lacked money and social standing. This stranger was Jae-young, her ex-boyfriend. A woman's voice suddenly snapped her back to reality. The woman instantly recognized Hai-Ran. They were close friends from high school. Yoon-ju, Hai-Ran's close friend, clearly unaware of the complicated relationship between Hai-Ran and her husband, cheerfully introduced them. Jae-young, treating Hai-Ran as a stranger, introduced himself as Kelvin, Yoon-ju's husband, adding that she could call him by his Korean name, Jae-young. Hearing that name, Hai Ran's eyes widened in disbelief. Kelvin's sudden return had been so unexpected, she hadn't even seen a picture of him. And now, this Kelvin was her ex-boyfriend. The carefully prepared interview plan vanished from her mind. She wanted to flee, but Jae-young's gaze held her captive, his eyes cold and indifferent. By the time Hai Ran finished her business at the airport, Tae-wook had already made arrangements for his mother-in-law's funeral. The professional setback, coupled with her mother's sudden death, left Hai Ran numb. She wanted to cry, to scream, but no tears came. Just then, the primetime news broadcast aired. Her time slot was now occupied by a little-known newcomer. Watching the broadcast, a chilling resolve hardened Hai Ran's gaze. She began to eat voraciously, as if consuming her anger and frustration, until she was sick and vomited. A cruel plan began to form. She informed her friend Yoon-ju about her mother's passing. After Yoon-ju offered her condolences, Hai Ran suggested the exclusive interview with Kelvin. She reasoned that a request from someone grieving would be difficult to refuse. The next day, Yoon-ju brought her husband to the television station. The director, beaming, immediately replaced the scheduled anchor with Hai Ran. However, as Hai Ran opened the door to Kelvin's dressing room, intending to discuss the interview script, she was met with an awkward scene. She stammered an explanation and turned to leave. But Kelvin stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. He asked if she was afraid. Hai Ran evaded the question, instructing him to stick to the script and not jeopardize the live broadcast. The impoverished boyfriend she once scorned now stood before her, a world champion. Her interview subject, in her studio, facing Kelvin's intense gaze, even Hai Ran, with 7 years of broadcasting experience, felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. Composing herself, Hai Ran, ever the consummate professional, began the interview. She asked Kelvin what his next goal was after achieving the world championship. His answer stunned her. "You, Hai Ran." The air in the studio thickened with tension. Then, Kelvin calmly elaborated, stating his ultimate goal was to become #1 in his field. Just like her, he declared his unwavering determination to achieve this. The interview, despite the charged atmosphere, concluded smoothly, garnering positive reviews. The network director, capitalizing on the success, decided to produce a new documentary series featuring prominent figures, and wanted Kelvin as their first guest. Kelvin instinctively declined, but upon learning Hai Ran would be the host, he changed his mind. Hai Ran was furious. The director's plan meant she would lose her primetime news slot to the newcomer, and be relegated to this new program. The director's hands were tied. The decision to remove Hai Ran from primetime came from above, and Kelvin had specifically requested her for the documentary. Resigned, Hai Ran agreed. Late that night, after work, Hai Ran longed for a sympathetic ear. Her husband was at the office. She called him repeatedly, but he didn't answer. Just then, her phone rang. Preparing to unleash her frustration, she was met with the voice of her ex-boyfriend, Kelvin. He had called in the middle of the night, simply to ask if she was confident about the documentary. He then handed the phone to his wife, Yoon-ju, putting on a display of affection, while the line remained open. Hearing their intimate whispers, Hai Ran seethed with anger. She reached for a glass of water to cool down, but the refrigerator contained only the herbal tonics her mother-in-law had given her, hoping for a grandchild. The following morning, Ji-won, the ambitious newcomer, visited Hai Ran, deliberately bringing up Kelvin's wife, Hai Ran's friend. She pointed out how Yoon-ju had become the envy of every woman. Despite lacking any particular talent, she had landed a perfect man, handsome, wealthy, charming, and charismatic. Unlike some people, Ji-won implied, who sacrificed family for careers and were now being forced to step down. The veiled insults, clearly aimed at Hai Ran without explicitly naming her, fueled her simmering resentment. The day's filming focused on Kelvin and Yoon-ju's loving relationship. Witnessing their passionate interactions, Hai Ran was flooded with memories, and her desires stirred. The fiercely proud woman felt a pang of envy. Kelvin, she noticed, occasionally glanced in her direction. After the shoot, Hai Ran spotted Ji-won alone with Kelvin, offering him coffee, her eyes full of admiration. Just then, Yoon-ju asked Hai Ran to give Kelvin a ride home, as she had another engagement. Remembering Ji-won's look, a plan began to take shape in Hai Ran's mind. So, right in front of Ji-won, Hai Ran called a colleague, explaining she needed to drive Kelvin home, but had a sudden conflict and needed someone to cover for her. Every word was a carefully placed breadcrumb, leading Ji-won into a trap. Ji-won overheard everything. Thanks to Hai Ran's deliberate maneuvering, the rookie reporter fell right into the snare. A young woman alone with a handsome, wealthy man late at night, Ji-won succumbed to temptation, completely oblivious to the fact that she was being played. The next morning, a stack of compromising photos landed on the network director's desk. Furious, he immediately revoked Ji-won's primetime anchor position. Ji-won, initially shocked, quickly realized she'd been set up. The coveted primetime slot, which she had fought so hard for, was back in Hai-ran's hands. Ji-won confronted Hai-ran, threatening retaliation for such a despicable act. Hai-ran, however, remained unfazed. She calmly warned Ji-won that leaking the photos would result in her dismissal from the network. Another woman's husband, she cautioned, wasn't something to trifle with. With that, Hai-ran walked away, satisfied. But Hai-ran wasn't done. She went to the director and proposed removing Ji-won from all on-air programs, relegating her to post-production work. She argued that if the photos were leaked, it would not only be a scandal for Ji-won, but would also tarnish the network's reputation. The director, seeing the logic, agreed. Ji-won was livid. Not only had she lost the primetime slot, but now her morning news program was also taken away. Fuming, she sent the photos to Kelvin, revealing Hai-ran's scheme and urging him to take action. If the photos went public, she argued, she would only lose her job, while he stood to lose money, reputation, and even his family. That day, Kelvin was at a company to discuss an endorsement deal. He happened to run into Hai-ran's husband, Tae-wook, who was also there. They hadn't met before, but Tae-wook's companion recognized Kelvin. Knowing he'd been on Hai-ran's show, he couldn't resist asking if the nation's goddess was as alluring in person. He commented on her beauty and womanly charms. Overhearing someone gossiping about his wife, Tae-wook, a lawyer, reached his limit. He informed them that such disrespectful comments could result in a year in jail, a warning, and a hefty fine. He then introduced himself as Kang Tae-wook, Hai-ran's husband. Upon learning this, Kelvin apologized, but Tae-wook ignored him and walked away. Before he could leave, Kelvin called out, claiming that Hai-ran had invited him on a vacation to Thailand. At the same time, Hai-ran was approached by representatives from the Blue House, the South Korean presidential office, who wanted her to be their spokesperson. Her status as a top anchor, combined with her father-in-law's position as a prosecutor and her husband's as a national lawyer, made her an ideal candidate. They explained that there would be a 1-month vetting period where she would maintain her current life, work, and family. If she passed, she had a 90% chance of being selected, elevating her career and social standing to new heights. Hai-ran was tempted. Returning to the station, she learned from the director that Kelvin had requested a photo shoot in Thailand, and that she, as the show's host, was expected to accompany him. Hai-ran immediately refused, wanting nothing more to do with Kelvin, especially not in Thailand. The director, however, was insistent, reminding her that he'd returned her primetime slot. Frustrated, Hai-ran confronted Kelvin, demanding to know his motives. He admitted it was revenge for their past. He threatened to expose their relationship, reminding her they had lived together for over a year. Normally, Hai-ran wouldn't care if her husband knew, but with the Blue House opportunity on the line, she couldn't risk it. Their fragile marriage couldn't withstand such a revelation. After hearing Kelvin's claim about the Thailand trip, Tae-wook returned home and told Hai-ran about the encounter. Hai-ran, instantly tense, asked how he knew Kelvin, fearing he would discover their past. After 10 years of marriage, Tae-wook easily saw through her facade. He wanted to ask about the trip, but the words caught in his throat. He felt it would be humiliating to confront her, and he didn't want to interfere in her life. He opened a drawer, retrieved a long-prepared divorce document, and felt a hollowness inside, as if he'd lost something precious. Troubled, Hai-ran couldn't sleep. She sat up all night, and by morning she'd made a decision. She went to the director and told him to find someone else for the Thailand trip. She wasn't going. With that, Hai-ran turned to leave, but the director stopped her, instructing her to discuss the matter directly with the chairman, who was currently golfing with Kelvin. It became clear that Kelvin had planned this, using the chairman to pressure Hai-ran. But things were about to get worse. Hai-ran discovered that the news script, finalized the night before, now contained additional segments, specifically for Ji-won. Furious, she lashed out at the director, who advised her not to bother with the child. Ji-won, ignoring Hai-ran's outburst, walked onto the set, taunting her mercilessly. Before the broadcast even began, they were locked in a heated argument on live television. Suddenly, Hai-ran ripped off her headset and told the director to do whatever he wanted with the extra segments. If Ji-won wanted the anchor chair that badly, she could have it. Storming off the set, Hai-ran confronted the director, demanding he choose between her and Ji-won. If he chose Ji-won, she would leave the station immediately. She couldn't tolerate his attempts to force her to go to Thailand, while simultaneously pushing her out of her primetime slot. She fixed him with a steely gaze, reminiscent of the unwavering resolve she'd shown when she terminated her pregnancy. With only 5 minutes until airtime, the director panicked. They stared each other down, neither willing to yield. Finally, with just 1 minute left, the director caved. He ordered HR to transfer Ji-won to a local station. Ji-won, utterly defeated, was effectively fired. As she left, she passed Hai-ran, who ignored her completely, as if she were an insignificant annoyance. Meanwhile, Hai-ran's mother-in-law discovered the prepared divorce papers in her son's drawer. She immediately summoned Hai-ran, demanding an explanation. She learned that her son and daughter-in-law had been sleeping in separate rooms for 5 years, despite her constant deliveries of fertility-boosting tonics. Disgusted, she demanded they divorce. She'd never liked Hai-ran, and had only tolerated her in hopes of a grandchild. Now that hope was gone. She turned to leave. After a moment's hesitation, Hai-ran chased after her, falling to her knees. She confessed to terminating her pregnancy for the sake of her career, explaining she'd done it to earn her father-in-law's approval. On her wedding day, he hadn't attended, and she'd been forbidden from visiting their home, simply because she was an ordinary woman. He'd only acknowledged her after she became a prime-time anchor. Hai-ran's mother-in-law was speechless. Tae-wook, standing at the doorway, witnessed the entire scene. He remembered the day he proposed. Hai-ran had been brutally honest with him during their courtship, admitting she didn't love him and was only interested in his family's wealth and status. She craved success. Tae-wook, in return, hadn't cared, promising to use his influence to advance her career. Snapping back to the present, he strode forward, tore up the divorce papers, and told his mother to leave. This was between him and Hai-ran. After his mother left, the estranged couple had a rare moment of conversation. Hai-ran told Tae-wook about the Blue House opportunity and asked for his help, at least for the 1-month vetting period, requesting they postpone the divorce. She framed it as him fulfilling his earlier promise. Tae-wook agreed, but he had a question. Why was she going to Thailand? Hai-ran, caught off guard, stammered that it was for work. She'd heard a Blue House secretary would be there, and she wanted to network. The next day, Hai-ran arrived in Thailand with the film crew. The heat was oppressive. Kelvin told Yoon-ju to go shopping in the city, rather than endure the scorching sun. His real motive was to get her out of the way. But as soon as Yoon-ju left, a torrential downpour halted filming. Drenched, Hai-ran returned to her room to change. As she was closing the door, a hand reached in. Kelvin pushed his way inside. Hai-ran told him to leave, but he shoved her against the wall. She tried to escape, but he grabbed her, pulling her into a tight embrace. During the struggle, the brooch Tae-wook had given her fell to the floor. At that moment, a taxi pulled up to the hotel. Tae-wook stepped out. Moments later, Hai-ran's phone rang. Her husband, having flown across the ocean, was at her door. As he approached, he saw her rushing out of her room. Hai-ran was stunned by his sudden appearance. Tae-wook explained that he knew about her desire to connect with the Blue House secretary, who happened to be an old classmate. He'd come to make the introduction. Hai-ran was incredulous. Despite his family's connections, Tae-wook had never been one to leverage relationships. As they were talking, Kelvin emerged from the room. Tae-wook's eyes locked onto his. In Kelvin's hand was Hai-ran's brooch. Back in her room, Hai-ran thanked Tae-wook for flying to Thailand to help her. Tae-wook replied that he was merely fulfilling his promise. She'd married him for his status, and he'd promised to let her use him. He intended to keep that promise before their marriage ended. With that, he left. Alone at a bar, Tae-wook wrestled with a deep, unspoken sadness. But Hai-ran followed him. She knew once he made up his mind, he wouldn't budge. However, they were in public, and she didn't want anyone to see the cracks in their marriage. She pleaded with him to return to their room, offering to sleep on the sofa. Tae-wook brushed her off, telling her not to worry about him. At that moment, Kelvin and Yoon-ju, out for a stroll, stumbled upon the scene. The four of them ended up having drinks together. Hai-ran, feeling awkward, asked Tae-wook if he was tired from the journey and wanted to rest. He flatly refused. Kelvin then pointedly asked if it was difficult loving a successful woman. He launched into a story about a past love, a time when he had nothing, and the ambitious woman he loved left him for a successful man with a prominent family. Hai-ran, realizing he was talking about her, excused herself, claiming fatigue, and urged Tae-wook to join her. He remained seated, saying he wanted to stay a little longer. After the women left, Tae-wook gestured for Kelvin to continue his story. Kelvin, eager to oblige, described how, after achieving success, he reconnected with this woman, rekindling their old flame. Tae-wook's expression changed. To make matters worse, Kelvin produced a brooch, the one Tae-wook had given Hai-ran when she was pregnant. Kelvin claimed they'd been a little drunk and asked Tae-wook to return it to her. Tae-wook stumbled back to his room, finding Hai-ran asleep. He felt a profound sense of despair, a dizzying emptiness as if all his energy had been drained. He collapsed onto the bed, tears welling in his eyes, unable to sleep. Back home, Hai-ran found Tae-wook packing his bags. He told her he would be staying at the office. Confused, she watched as he placed the brooch she'd lost on the table, explaining that Kelvin had found it. Hai Ran froze, the scene from the previous night flashing through her mind. Instinctively, she stepped aside, unsure what Kelvin had told her husband. She watched helplessly as Tae-wook walked out the door. Hai Ran felt a wave of despair. Her marriage was crucial to her candidacy for the Blue House position. Just then, Kelvin's phone rang. It was Hai Ran. She unleashed a torrent of anger and accusations, warning him to stay away from her and her husband. If he pushed her too far, she would leak the photos of him and Ji-won, ruining him completely. Another sleepless night. Hai Ran, feeling the need to take action, busied herself in the kitchen, preparing a lunchbox for Tae-wook at his office. He barely acknowledged her, telling his assistant he had an off-site meeting, and walking straight out the door without a glance in her direction. After he left, Hai Ran picked up a stack of files. The assistant explained that Tae-wook was consumed by a particularly challenging case. A foreign worker owed a year's wages, had gone to his company to demand payment, but had been falsely accused of assault and arrested. Determined to win back her husband's affection, Hai Ran instructed the assistant to add the story to that day's news broadcast. The assistant complied, but the director refused. News wasn't a game, he argued, and stories couldn't be aired without proper vetting. Moreover, the company involved was powerful and influential. Who would take responsibility if they were sued? Hai Ran declared that she would. The director, powerless to stop her, relented. The story, once aired, immediately went viral. The company in question had just signed Kelvin as their spokesperson. Public criticism exploded, accusing the company of hypocrisy for spending lavishly on celebrity endorsements while owing a worker back wages. Even Kelvin was caught in the crossfire. Representatives from the company stormed the network, and the director raged at Hai Ran for her reckless actions. She stood firm, arguing that a journalist's primary responsibility was to pursue truth and justice, regardless of a company's wealth or influence. The director, exasperated, changed the subject, asking if she was still pursuing the Blue House position. He revealed that they had contacted him. Hai Ran asked what he had told them. He'd been honest, he said, describing her as stubborn, arrogant, impulsive, a perfectionist, self-righteous, and thoroughly unpleasant. Worse, he added, was her unshakable belief in her moral compass, which led her to act as judge and jury. Hai Ran smiled. The director advised her to abandon the pursuit, claiming she wasn't suited for that path. Power, he warned, was intoxicating and dangerous. If she stayed at the network, the director's chair would eventually be hers. But Hai Ran was resolute. She wanted to climb higher, to reach the pinnacle of her ambition. She wouldn't allow herself any regrets. Kelvin, with Ji-won, saw the news report and his expression hardened. He called his manager, stating his intention to destroy Hai Ran completely. After he left, Ji-won's phone rang. It was Yoon-ju. Meanwhile, Hai Ran returned to her car to find a stack of photos on her windshield. Her blood ran cold. There were photos of Kelvin assaulting her. She knew she was being threatened. After a moment of panic, she called Kelvin, arranging a meeting, and drove off. Unbeknownst to her, Tae-wook had been waiting in the parking lot and, driven by suspicion, followed her. They met under a bridge. Kelvin got into Hai Ran's car, and his first question was whether she still loved him. To appease him, Hai Ran didn't deny it, acknowledging their past love. Even though they'd separated and started their own families, the buried feelings, she claimed, hadn't faded. Kelvin then asked if she loved Tae-wook. Hai Ran fell silent. After a hesitation, she said no. The air in the car grew thick with tension. Kelvin moved closer. In the distance, Tae-wook watched from his car. At the same time, Yoon-ju met with Ji-won, confronting her directly about the affair. She asked how much money Ji-won wanted, offering to pay her to leave and pretend nothing had happened. Ji-won didn't answer, instead asking Yoon-ju how she planned to deal with Hai Ran. Would she use the same tactics? Ji-won, consumed by hatred for Hai Ran, saw this as an opportunity to destroy her, to ruin her career and reputation. After the meeting with Kelvin, Hai Ran felt a mixture of anger and humiliation, repeatedly wiping her lips as if trying to remove something disgusting. Just then, Yoon-ju called, relaying Ji-won's words and asking if they were true. Hai Ran, panicked, swerved and crashed her car into a guardrail. After composing herself, she met with Yoon-ju, and threw the photos Kelvin had used to threaten her onto the table. She lied, claiming she knew nothing about them and that she too was a victim. Ji-won, she explained, had obtained the intimate photos of her and Kelvin, and, believing Hai Ran was behind her demotion, had collaborated with Kelvin to get revenge. Yoon-ju, stunned, believed her. Returning home, she packed her bags, suggesting she and Kelvin return to America. She even registered him for an upcoming tournament. Kelvin refused. Yoon-ju, reaching her breaking point, unleashed her pent-up emotions. They argued fiercely. Suddenly, Kelvin received a phone call. After hanging up, he started to leave. Yoon-ju tried to stop him, but he ignored her pleas and walked out. The next day at the station, the director needed to insert a breaking news story. Hai-ran stared at the script, her eyes widening in disbelief, as if her soul had left her body. The director's voice, shouting in her earpiece, snapped her back to reality. Her ex-boyfriend, Kelvin, was dead, killed in a car accident. Police suspected foul play and found Hai-ran's brooch in his car. She was now the prime suspect. Questioned by the police, Hai-ran couldn't bring herself to reveal her past relationship with Kelvin or admit to their meeting that night. Confronted with the brooch, she had no explanation, her eyes betraying her unease. Suddenly, Tae-wook appeared as her lawyer. He informed the police that his client had the right to remain silent and, until presented with concrete evidence, would not cooperate with the investigation. He escorted her out. A throng of reporters swarmed the police station. Tae-wook suggested they use the back exit, but Hai-ran refused. Disappointed that even her husband seemed to doubt her, she declared her innocence to the waiting cameras. She had nothing to hide. She stated that the police were wrongly accusing her without evidence, and that she reserved the right to sue them for defamation. With unwavering resolve, she walked through the crowd, unflinching in the face of the barrage of questions. Despite her defiant stance, the scandal tarnished her image, and she was temporarily suspended from her prime time slot. She pleaded with the director, who, though sympathetic, could only offer her a leave of absence pending the investigation's outcome. Hai-ran's in-laws saw the news. Her mother-in-law called Tae-wook, who didn't answer. He knew what she wanted, a divorce. Tae-wook met with Hai-ran's close friend, Song-yi, hoping to learn more about her relationship with Kelvin. Song-yi knew nothing but insisted that Hai-ran would never commit such a crime. When Tae-wook returned home, Hai-ran, aware of his meeting with Song-yi, confronted him, offering to tell him everything. If he wanted to defend her, why not ask her directly? Clearly, he didn't trust her, so why bother defending her at all? Tae-wook didn't answer, instead asking about the brooch. Why was it in Kelvin's car? Hai-ran couldn't answer. She insisted Kelvin was just her friend's husband, and that she hadn't killed him. Her tone and eyes pleaded sincerity, but she never explained the brooch. Tae-wook reaffirmed his intention to defend her, even if she was guilty. Hai-ran vehemently denied both the murder and infidelity. The daughter-in-law of a family of judges, embroiled in a murder scandal, became the subject of public gossip and ridicule. Hai-ran's mother-in-law, mortified, again demanded a divorce. Before Tae-wook could respond, onlookers began gossiping about Hai-ran, calling her a loose woman. Overhearing the gossip about his wife, Tae-wook snapped. Ignoring his mother's pleas, he lunged at the gossipers, throwing a punch. Afterward, he handed them his business card, inviting them to sue him. His mother was stunned. In her eyes, her son had always been a calm, composed gentleman. Tae-wook saw nothing wrong with his actions. Hai-ran was his wife. No matter what people said about her, he would defend her. With that, he walked away. Meanwhile, Hai-ran decided to resign. The director refused. The network's ratings had plummeted since her replacement had taken over the prime time slot. The chairman, furious, had ordered the director to restore them, by any means necessary. So, Hai-ran was back. She returned to the anchor chair, her public image tarnished, but her confidence unshaken. In her domain, she was still a force to be reckoned with. The broadcast was a triumph, not only reclaiming lost viewers, but setting a new network record. A junior colleague offered her water. The crew gave her a thumbs up, and the entire studio rose to their feet. She had earned their respect. Tae-wook waited for her in the parking lot. He was there to ask about the missing memory card from her car's dashcam. The police had discovered its absence. It was the only evidence that could prove she wasn't at the scene of Kelvin's death. Hai-ran didn't know when or how it had disappeared. Frustrated and weary, she didn't want to answer his questions. He surprised her by complimenting her broadcast, the first time he'd ever praised her work. Tae-wook apologized sincerely, admitting he'd failed as a husband. Instead of supporting her, he'd doubted her. From now on, he declared, he would believe her unconditionally. Tears welled in Hai-ran's eyes. His words pierced her carefully constructed armor. Despite her strength and ambition, she was still just a woman. After everything she'd endured, all she wanted was a shoulder to lean on. Meanwhile, Yoon-ju stared at a positive pregnancy test. There was no joy. At this crucial moment, her husband had betrayed her. She'd believed her tolerance and forgiveness would win him back, but he'd discarded her without a second thought. Then, that same night, Kelvin died in a car accident. The police ruled it a homicide. Yoon-ju, the prime suspect, was rumored to have been having an affair with him, but Yoon-ju didn't believe Hai-ran was capable of murder. She went to the police, withdrawing her complaint and halting the investigation. Kelvin's death had devastated her. and she didn't want to see her friend suffer too, especially considering her pregnancy. She informed Hai Ran of her decision and announced her intention to return to America. Hai Ran supported her, offering to connect her with an obstetrician there. Back home, packing her bags, Yoon-ju discovered a memory card in Kelvin's pocket. Curious, she inserted it into her laptop and saw Hai Ran on the screen. It was the missing dashcam footage. At the same time, Hai Ran received a cryptic text, "I know you killed Kelvin." The director received the same message. The chairman immediately demanded that Hai Ran be taken off the air. Despite the ratings boost, she was now a liability, a ticking time bomb. He ordered the director to reinstate Ji-won. The director, though reluctant, couldn't disobey. The mounting pressure of public scrutiny, the threatening messages, and her faltering career left Hai Ran exhausted. Then, Tae-wook gave her an invitation to a prestigious legal gathering hosted by Korea University's law school. The attendees were prominent lawyers and powerful prosecutors, including the chairman of the network. Hai Ran was surprised and confused. Tae-wook had always disdained networking, yet here he was, pulling strings for her. Touched, she didn't want him to compromise his principles and returned the invitation. Tae-wook told her he'd promised to protect her reputation, her position, everything she held dear, now and in the future. How could he call himself a man if he couldn't even protect his wife? He wouldn't let anyone bully or harm her. He would keep his promise, no matter what. Hai Ran, deeply moved, kissed him passionately. After years of distance, they reconnected. The event was exclusive, the kind money couldn't buy. The guests were the nation's top lawyers, influential media figures, and powerful prosecutors. But those who gained access to the inner circle were the elite of the elite. They belonged to a clandestine club known as Golden. Tae-wook, though a relatively junior lawyer, commanded respect. His father was a chief judge and a founding member of the exclusive Golden Club. Tae-wook's purpose in bringing Hai Ran was to secure her return to the primetime anchor chair. However, when he approached the network chairman, he was met with a hesitant response. Given Hai Ran's status as a murder suspect, putting her back on primetime was risky. Tae-wook then recounted a story from 5 years prior about the chairman's son, who had killed someone in a drunk driving accident. Tae-wook reminded him of the considerable sum spent to ensure his son's release due to insufficient evidence. The threat was clear. He wasn't asking, he was ordering the chairman to reinstate Hai Ran. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Hai Ran received a cryptic text. "You look beautiful tonight, murderer." She glanced around, spotting a masked man. Without hesitation, she gave chase. She caught a glimpse of his face. It was Kelvin's manager, Dong Hyun. By the time she reached the parking lot, he was gone. Spray painted across her car were the words, "Go Hai Ran is a murderer." Tae-wook rushed to her side, asking if she knew who was responsible. To conceal her connection to Kelvin, Hai Ran claimed ignorance, saying she would handle it herself. The next day, a rough-looking man named Myung-woo arrived at Tae-wook's law office for a job interview. The assistant asked about his previous employment. "I just got out of prison," he replied. 19 years. The assistant, nearly fainting, cautiously inquired about his crime, explaining that the job involved legal work. "Murder," Myung-woo stated flatly. Terrified, the assistant consulted Tae-wook, who, to his surprise, hired Myung-woo. He needed someone who wasn't afraid to get their hands dirty. He gave Myung-woo a photo of Dong Hyun, the man harassing Hai Ran, and instructed him to find him. Simultaneously, Hai Ran confronted Dong Hyun. She'd done her research, learning about his critically ill sister, who required dialysis twice a week, and his desperate need for money. With his weakness exposed, Dong Hyun had little to say, but he wasn't afraid. He had the photos from Thailand, the ones that could ruin Hai Ran. He turned to leave. Hai Ran offered him 100 million won for the photos. She told Dong Hyun to choose between 100 million won and a stack of useless photos, then turned to leave. Unseen, Myung-woo watched the exchange from the shadows. Back at the station, Dong Hyun called Hai Ran, and they arranged to meet at the mall the following day at 5 p.m. However, the police had also identified Dong Hyun as a person of interest. They encountered him at the elevator, leading to a dramatic chase through the mall. Dong Hyun managed to evade them several times, but was finally apprehended by Myung-woo. Early the next morning, Yoon-ju waited outside Tae-wook's law office. When he arrived, she approached him, feigning a chance encounter. She explained that she'd found a memory card among Kelvin's belongings, and discovered it contained footage from Hai Ran's dashcam. The subsequent images on the card, images of Kelvin and Hai Ran together, had enraged her. She now knew about their past relationship. Yoon-ju invited Hai Ran to a restaurant, announcing her decision to stay in Korea. Kelvin's death had deeply affected Hai Ran, she reasoned, and Hai Ran had been so kind, helping with the funeral arrangements and even contacting doctors in America for her. She couldn't just leave Hairan to deal with the aftermath alone. Just then, Tae-wook arrived, having also received an invitation from Yoon-ju. Hairan sensed something was amiss. Yoon-ju asked Tae-wook to represent her in a legal matter. Kelvin had signed an endorsement deal shortly before his death, and the company, citing the scandal and his untimely demise, was demanding not only a refund, but also a substantial sum in damages. Tae-wook started to decline, admitting he wasn't experienced in such cases, but Yoon-ju quickly reassured him, then added, with a pointed sigh, "When Kelvin was alive, everyone was so kind to him. But now that he's gone, there's no one to help. It's just how the world works, I suppose, but it's still sad." The remark was clearly aimed at Hairan. Hairan agreed to let Tae-wook handle the case, partly because of the scandal's implications, and partly because she wanted to know what Yoon-ju was up to. As they were leaving, Yoon-ju asked Tae-wook for a ride home, explaining that taking the bus while pregnant was difficult. He agreed. Hairan, seeing them leave together, realized she was Yoon-ju's target. By the time Tae-wook dropped Yoon-ju off, it was evening. As a gesture of gratitude, she invited him in for dinner. He instinctively declined. Yoon-ju insisted he at least review the contract details. Unable to refuse, Tae-wook accompanied her, texting Hairan that he would be home after dinner at Yoon-ju's. After dinner, Yoon-ju gave him the contract. As he reviewed it, she moved closer, almost pressing against him. Hairan, arriving home to find Tae-wook still out, called him, but he didn't answer. Since he'd texted, she decided to wait. Tae-wook, engrossed in the contract, lost track of time. Yoon-ju brought him coffee and played a song, telling him it was Hairan's favorite in high school. The song was the first step in her plan for revenge. The next morning, the couple finally reunited. Tae-wook explained that he'd been so absorbed in the contract, he'd lost track of time, and, returning so late, hadn't wanted to disturb her. Hairan was about to express her displeasure when Tae-wook received a call, interrupting her and forcing her to swallow her words. Myung-woo informed Tae-wook that he had Dong-hyun. Hearing Hairan's voice in the background, Myung-woo tensed. Tae-wook, sensing Dong-hyun had something valuable, urged Myung-woo to retrieve it quickly. Hanging up, Myung-woo grabbed a chair and approached Dong-hyun menacingly. Meanwhile, Hairan, blackmailed with the compromising photos, was about to pay Dong-hyun 100 million won. Unbeknownst to her, 2 police officers were watching from a distance. The meeting time had passed by half an hour, and Dong-hyun still hadn't shown up. The officers grew restless. A man in a low-pulled baseball cap walked past the officers, then past Hairan, dropping a memory card at her feet before quickly disappearing. Hairan, stunned, recognized him. It was Myung-woo, the man she could never forget. In high school, she had been accosted by a thug. Myung-woo had saved her, accidentally killing the man in the process. To protect her, he'd sent her away, taking the blame himself. He'd served 19 years, following her career in prison. Upon his release, he'd gone straight to Tae-wook's office. Confused and shaken, Hairan didn't understand why Myung-woo had reappeared, especially with the compromising photos. She checked the memory card, confirming they were the photos taken of her, then flushed it down the toilet. As the water swirled, her anxiety began to subside. She needed to focus on her ambitions. Her candidacy for the Blue House spokesperson position had been derailed by the murder investigation. The position was now going to another anchor at the network, the announcement just days away. Determined to reclaim it, Hairan instructed her assistant to dig up information on the other anchor's past involvement in overseas gambling, a scandal the chairman had suppressed years ago. The information was buried somewhere in the network servers. That evening, the other anchor was meeting with the Blue House secretary. He was in the restroom, preparing for the meeting, eager to make a good impression. Hairan appeared, confronting him with his gambling history. She advised him to withdraw his candidacy. She placed a USB drive containing the evidence on the counter and left. News of the anchor's sudden withdrawal reached the director. He admired Hairan's ruthlessness, but still urged her to reconsider her own ambitions. Her primetime slot was still vacant, and he feared she would be corrupted by power. Hairan refused. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She proposed letting Ji-won take over her primetime show, in exchange for the director's full support of her Blue House bid. Returning home in high spirits, Hairan decided to cook dinner for Tae-wook, only to learn he'd already eaten at Yoon-ju's. He explained that Yoon-ju hadn't been feeling well, so he'd taken her to the hospital and then home. Hairan felt a prick of annoyance. Tae-wook added that he was taking Yoon-ju to a negotiation the following day. Hairan, jealous but unable to justify her anger, simply nodded. Later, she found herself imagining Tae-wook and Yoon-ju at the hospital, sharing a comfortable meal. She shook off the image. Just then, she heard music coming from Tae-wook's room. It was the song Yoon-ju had claimed was Hairan's high school favorite. A memory flooded back, the same song playing on the radio while she was held captive by the thug. It was a recurring nightmare. At that same moment, Yoon-ju, listening to the same song, smiled triumphantly. Later, Hai-ran overheard colleagues gossiping about her and Tae-wook, speculating about who had seduced whom. Yoon-ju, standing behind them, felt every word like a dagger to the heart. Unable to bear it any longer, she rushed out, confronting them. Did you see it with your own eyes? Do you have proof? Have you ever tried putting yourselves in my shoes? If this happened to you, could you laugh and gossip like this? My husband is dead. My unborn child will never know their father. Do you have any idea how devastating that is? Do you even care about my feelings? Yoon-ju, overwhelmed by grief, sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Tae-wook, witnessing her pain, felt a surge of empathy and a renewed determination to win her case. Back at the office, Yoon-ju asked Tae-wook if the gossip angered him, or if he resented Hai-ran. For the first time, Tae-wook revealed his true feelings. He confessed to feeling like a failure as a husband, deeply toward Hai-ran. If the rumors were true, he blamed his lack of attention. If they were false, he still blamed himself for not protecting her. Yoon-ju was dissatisfied with his answer. She pressed him, asking how he would feel if the rumors were confirmed, and if there was undeniable proof of Hai-ran's affair with Kelvin. Would he still feel the same? Would he remain so calm and understanding? Tae-wook replied that his wife had denied the affair, and he believed her completely. Yoon-ju, enraged, stormed out. Hai-ran, she thought, didn't deserve such unwavering devotion. Meanwhile, the Blue House secretary contacted Hai-ran. With the other anchor's withdrawal, the spokesperson's position was hers. Hai-ran was ecstatic. She later learned that Tae-wook had been working behind the scenes to secure the position for her. Given the scandal, she wouldn't have stood a chance otherwise. Tae-wook called to congratulate her. His simple congratulations warmed her heart. It was the first time she felt truly acknowledged by him. He bought her flowers, hoping to rekindle their connection. But Yoon-ju's questions lingered in his mind. Something felt wrong. He called her, but she didn't answer. A gut feeling told him Yoon-ju knew something. He turned his car around and headed to her apartment. Yoon-ju was watching the incriminating dashcam footage, the images a source of agonizing pain. She called the detectives, arranging a 7 p.m. meeting. She had crucial evidence to share. She left her apartment, forgetting to remove the memory card. Tae-wook arrived just as she was leaving. He didn't call out to her, choosing instead to wait until she was gone. He stood at Yoon-ju's door, recalling the passcode she'd entered earlier. Though unsure if he remembered it correctly, he tried it. The door clicked open. Inside, the sound of a familiar voice drifted down from upstairs. Hai-ran's voice. He followed the sound to Yoon-ju's room. There, on the computer screen, was Hai-ran. Tae-wook's face hardened. He instantly recognized it as the missing dashcam footage. He watched the video, the light draining from his eyes. Yoon-ju went to see Hai-ran. She believed Hai-ran didn't deserve Tae-wook's love, while she, the betrayed wife, was left with nothing. She revealed that she had the memory card and knew what had transpired that night. Because of Hai-ran, she'd lost Kelvin, lost everything she'd built over 10 years. While Hai-ran still had it all, even landing the Blue House position despite the scandal. It wasn't fair. She gave Hai-ran two choices: hand over the memory card to Tae-wook, destroy her marriage, or face public exposure and ruin. Hai-ran, speechless, felt trapped. Either outcome was devastating. She tried to explain, claiming she'd only been appeasing Kelvin under duress, that her words that night weren't genuine. She'd had to do it to secure the spokesperson position. She hadn't done anything wrong, she argued. Unless it was wrong not to have killed Kelvin that night. The memory of that encounter was her deepest shame. If she begged Yoon-ju for mercy now, she would live with the humiliation for the rest of her life. Trembling, she turned and walked away, maintaining a semblance of composure until she was out of sight. Then, she crumbled. Pulling herself together, she regained her usual confidence and arrogance. That night was her final broadcast. The story, a shoddy construction project linked to high-level corruption. The director urged her to drop it, to avoid angering powerful people, and to leave quietly. Hai-ran refused. Her reputation as the nation's goddess was built on her courage to speak truth to power. This was her journalistic creed and the final lesson she would impart to Ji-won. Meanwhile, Yoon-ju was on her way to meet the police. She told them about the phone call that had summoned Kelvin the night he died, expressing her certainty that it was from Hai-ran. The veteran detective immediately reported this to the prosecutor. However, Yoon-ju's testimony alone wasn't enough to charge Hai-ran with murder. 5 minutes before Hai-ran's broadcast, the chairman called the director, asking if the story had been killed. The director, with the implicated assemblyman sitting in his office, assured him everything was under control. The chairman, relieved, settled back. But as the broadcast began, the chairman's and the assemblyman's faces turned ashen. Even Director Kang, who had helped Taewook secure the Blue House position for Hai Ran, paled. She'd aired the story. The director's phone rang incessantly, but he ignored it, clinging to his journalistic principles. Taewook's phone also exploded with calls from influential figures. But he, having just left Yoonju's apartment, was in no mood to answer. At that moment, the prosecutor in charge of Kelvin's case received urgent orders from his superiors. He issued a warrant for Hai Ran's arrest. After the broadcast, a wave of melancholy washed over Hai Ran. Her colleagues filed out of the studio. She gazed at the set where she'd spent 7 years, whispering to herself, "Well done, Go Hai Ran. You were truly magnificent tonight." She was like a spectator admiring her performance. Suddenly, her colleagues rushed with champagne in hand, cheering and congratulating her. The director, bringing up the rear, smiled at her. But amidst the celebration, a stern voice broke through. "Go Hai Ran, you are a suspect in the murder of Kelvin. You have the right to remain silent. But anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Hai Ran, the nation's top anchor, was arrested on live television. Taewook, at a bar, drowning his sorrows, ignored his wife's calls. He'd just discovered her betrayal. The memory of her words, "I married him because I needed him, not because I loved him," echoing in his mind. He drank heavily, unable to contain his rage. Hai Ran stood alone in the interrogation room, a mixture of hope and dread churning inside her as she waited for a call from her husband that never came. The next morning, investigators raided Taewook's home. He learned of Hai Ran's arrest, his anger evaporating, replaced by a surge of panic. After assessing the situation, Taewook rushed to the prosecutor, arguing that the arrest was unlawful. They couldn't detain a suspect without concrete evidence. Yoonju's testimony alone wasn't sufficient. The prosecutor, unmoved, dismissed him, stating he was simply following orders. Taewook then sought help from Director Kang, who also claimed to be powerless. Desperate, Taewook realized something bigger was at play. Suspecting the network director knew who Hai Ran had offended, he ordered him to pull the story about the faulty construction project. Ji-won, however, ignored the director's instructions and prepared to air the story anyway. Before she could, investigators raided the station, ostensibly searching for evidence related to Kelvin's murder, but actually targeting the construction project story. Ji-won, realizing their true motive, alerted her assistant and tried to smuggle the files out. But the director intercepted her. Taewook, piecing together the events, realized the news report was the reason for Hai Ran's arrest. He instructed his assistant to inform her, advising her to remain absolutely silent. Hai Ran, finally understanding, contacted her assistant, telling him to put her in touch with Taewook. She had a plan. Meanwhile, based on Yoonju's statement, the police examined Kelvin's call logs, discovering the call had originated from a landline at the network. Checking employee records and security footage, they discovered the caller wasn't Hai Ran, but Han Ji-won. Yoonju had lied. At 9 p.m., Ji-won, replacing Hai Ran, appeared on the primetime news. She reported on Hai Ran's arrest and introduced a special guest, Taewook. He denounced the police for arresting and detaining his wife without evidence, accusing them of abusing their power. Law enforcement must be transparent and accountable, he declared. There can be no room for doubt or justification. When exercising authority, there can be no excuses beyond the law. I expect the prosecution to take responsibility and provide an explanation. Under pressure, the police released Hai Ran. As she walked out of the station, a familiar figure was waiting for her, Taewook. She felt a profound sense of relief and security. Her husband, to save her, had publicly challenged the police and prosecutors on live television. Watching Taewook defend Hai Ran on television, Yoonju was livid. She immediately called the network, intending to release the dashcam footage. But the video was gone. Realizing Taewook must have taken it, she stormed over to his office and slapped him across the face. "Who do you think you are?" she screamed. "How dare you delete my things?" Taewook denied everything, blindly defending Hai Ran and warning Yoonju to stay away from his wife. Yoonju, knowing she couldn't reason with him, left. Taewook, alone, nearly collapsed. The images and Hai Ran's words to Kelvin replayed in his mind. He gritted his teeth, tears streaming down his face as he repeatedly formatted the memory card. News of Taewook's public denouncement of the prosecution spread rapidly. Under pressure, they declared Hai Ran innocent. Taewook was waiting for her as she emerged from the station. A wave of warmth washed over Hai Ran. For 10 years, she'd felt alone. During her 48 hours in custody, she'd felt utterly isolated. Seeing Taewook, she finally realized she wasn't alone after all. They exchanged a tender look. Taewook put his arm around her and led her away. Yoonju wandered the streets, the falling snow mirroring the coldness in her heart. Seeing the news of Hai Ran's release, she felt a crushing wave of despair. Overwhelmed by grief and a sudden sharp pain in her abdomen, she collapsed. The next morning, Tae-wook left for work, finding milk, toast, and a note. "Don't forget to eat breakfast." Hai Ran smiled, experiencing a new and unfamiliar feeling, being cherished. Meanwhile, Tae-wook was arguing with his father, who considered his televised outburst a foolish and embarrassing act that had disgraced their family. He demanded that Tae-wook divorce Hai Ran. Tae-wook refused. Hai Ran was his wife and he would protect her, always. Hai Ran, returning to work, immediately confronted the director. She wouldn't let her arrest go unaddressed. The investigation into the construction project would continue. She would fight the corrupt officials and their powerful backers. The prosecutor in charge of Kelvin's case was reprimanded by his superiors. He'd made the prosecution look incompetent. He was given 3 days to find the killer or be fired. 3 days, he thought, was impossible. Yoon-ju awoke in the hospital, the devastating news confirming her miscarriage. The series of blows left her reeling. On the television screen, she saw reports of Hai Ran's exoneration. A burning rage consumed her. Meanwhile, Hai Ran received a tip. The assemblyman, a powerful figure implicated in the construction scandal, would be accepting a bribe that evening. Determined to expose him, both for the sake of justice and as revenge for her 48 hours of wrongful imprisonment, she devised a plan. Her assistant would tip off the police about an illegal transaction taking place at a hotel, then accompany them, equipped with a hidden camera, while Hai Ran waited in a news van, ready to broadcast live. However, their plan had been leaked. The assemblyman, alerted, contacted both the police and the network chairman, ordering them to shut down the operation. The assistant accompanied the police to the hotel room, but the officers, having received their orders, conducted a perfunctory search and prepared to leave. Ji-won, about to join them, received a call from the chairman, his words giving her pause. She remembered Hai Ran's advice. If she wanted to be a successful primetime anchor, she would face immense pressure and intimidation. She needed to withstand it, never bowing to power or money. That was the essence of true journalism. Ji-won made her choice. Now, their real plan began. Hai Ran walked into the hotel lobby and smashed the fire alarm. She needed to force the assemblyman out. The alarm blared, chaos erupting throughout the hotel. The assemblyman, hastily pulling up his trousers, rushed out, surrounded by security guards. Ji-won was waiting. The live broadcast began. The assemblyman, realizing he'd been trapped, began shouting, invoking his name and position, trying to intimidate Ji-won and the police. Ji-won thrust a microphone in his face, and her assistant raised the camera. The chaotic scene instantly went viral. The assemblyman's career was over. Back at the station, the director gave Hai Ran a discreet thumbs up. Her office was filled with congratulatory messages from her colleagues. She had earned their respect once again. Only Tae-wook knew the true danger she was in. The assemblyman was part of a larger corruption ring, headed by Director Kang, a man with immense influence in the legal system. He told his assistant to prepare for the worst. Hai Ran had poked a hornet's nest. He picked Hai Ran up from work, and they went out for a late-night celebratory dinner. As Hai Ran and Tae-wook celebrated, Yoon-ju approached them. Hai Ran tried to speak to her, but Yoon-ju just stared at her with a look of utter despair, then lunged at her. At the last moment, Myung-woo appeared, restraining Yoon-ju, while Tae-wook pulled Hai Ran into a protective embrace. Tae-wook, surprised, wondered why Myung-woo was there. Hai Ran was speechless. Meanwhile, the veteran detective stopped Ji-won after work. Kelvin's last call had been from her. He wanted to know why she'd called him so late at night. Ji-won avoided the question, instead describing Yoon-ju's visit and her accusations of an affair between Hai Ran and Kelvin. She suggested that Yoon-ju, enraged by the betrayal, had a motive for murder. Furthermore, Yoon-ju stood to gain the most from Kelvin's death. In the wake of the assemblyman scandal, Director Kang, seeking to contain the damage, met with the prosecutor in charge of Kelvin's case, pressuring him to find evidence against Hai Ran. A young man boarded a bus, pausing to tie his shoelace. Ignoring the driver's impatient urging, he kept glancing back, waiting for the girl he liked to board. On the crowded bus, he protectively held her close. With exams approaching, he thoughtfully prepared study materials for her. Their relationship was more than friendship, but not quite love. They even planned to attend the same university. But life had other plans. Hai Ran's family ran out of money, and her mother was unable to afford her tuition. Determined to pursue her dream, Hai Ran went to a moneylender, promising to repay the loan with interest. The lender agreed, instructing her to return that evening. When she did, he attempted to assault her. She escaped, running into Myung-woo, who was rushing to her aid. Seeing her disheveled appearance, Myung-woo flew into a rage. When Hai Ran looked back, the The moneylender was lying in a pool of blood. After Myung-woo's imprisonment, his grandmother gave Hai-ran a sum of money, Myung-woo's tuition. Hai-ran recounted the story to Tae-wook. Sometimes she confessed. She wondered why Myung-woo hadn't believed her. Nothing had happened, yet a man had died, and another had spent his life in prison. Tae-wook remained silent. After she left, his pent-up emotions erupted. Hearing a noise, Hai-ran turned back, but stopped before opening the door. From inside, she heard Tae-wook's gut-wrenching sobs. The next day, her mother-in-law confronted her again, berating her for disgracing their family. Her father-in-law was a prominent figure in the legal world, her husband a respected public lawyer, and she, the wife and daughter-in-law, was a suspected murderer who had dragged her husband onto television, making them a laughingstock. She demanded a divorce. If Tae-wook wouldn't do it, then Hai-ran must. If she had any conscience, she would set him free. Meanwhile, Tae-wook met with Myung-woo, demanding to know why he protected Hai-ran. Myung-woo didn't answer directly, saying that when you love someone, you instinctively protect them. He'd thought it was love, but now he realized it was just his pathetic pride. When you have to work at protecting love, it's no longer love. It's just protecting your ego. He then asked Tae-wook, "What kind of feeling do you have for Hai-ran?" Tae-wook, without answering, went to see Hai-ran at the station. He confessed his true feelings. Despite their troubled marriage, if he could go back 10 years, he would still choose her. He pulled her close and kissed her. At that moment, he had his answer. He wanted to protect Hai-ran because he loved her, deeply and unconditionally. That night, after 7 years of estrangement, they finally reconnected. But the next morning, Hai-ran found a lawsuit notice from Yoon-ju in her mail. At work, colleagues taunted her, calling her shameless. Rumors of her affair were rampant, yet her husband pretended nothing was wrong, even going on television to defend her. How pathetic, they sneered. Hai-ran was speechless. That evening, Tae-wook prepared a candlelit dinner, urging her to sit. Watching him fuss over her, Hai-ran's heart ached. She realized, in that moment, that she loved him. She also made a difficult decision. She would divorce him. She wouldn't let him represent her in the lawsuit. She wouldn't drag him down with her anymore. She said, "Let's end this," turning to go to her room. On her dressing table, she found a single rose with a note tucked inside. "I love you." Attached to the note was a delicate necklace. It was the second gift Tae-wook had given her, the first being the brooch when she was pregnant. Overwhelmed, Hai-ran burst into tears. 7 days until the trial. Tae-wook learned Yoon-ju's trump card, a witness to Kelvin's murder. Someone claimed to have seen Hai-ran kill him. Hai-ran's new lawyer hadn't contacted her. She grew anxious. Without Tae-wook by her side, she felt lost and uncertain about her decision to divorce him. The next day, she arranged to meet with her lawyer. Surprised to find Tae-wook waiting for her, he'd taken over her case. Hai-ran tried to refuse, but he was adamant. He was her lawyer, and she was his client, nothing more. Meanwhile, Yoon-ju, preparing to return to America, decided to let go of her anger and resentment. Before leaving, she gave Dong-hyun, Kelvin's former manager, a sum of money, urging him to make a fresh start. Dong-hyun's eyes reddened. After she left, he slipped away without taking the money. Besides his sister, Kelvin and Yoon-ju were the only people who had ever treated him kindly. His sister had died a few days earlier. With nothing left to lose, he wanted revenge. Myung-woo, watching from the shadows, saw everything. Yoon-ju, fearing Dong-hyun might do something rash, called Tae-wook, who didn't answer. Under the pretense of discussing the case, Tae-wook took Hai-ran to the barbecue restaurant, where they'd had their first date. He didn't talk about the case, however. He talked about their 10-year marriage, confessing that he'd resented her for the abortion, for prioritizing her career, for disappointing him. That resentment had fueled his 7 years of coldness. But now he understood. He was the one who had failed her, imposing his values on her. He wanted to try again, to rebuild their relationship from scratch. Hai-ran remained silent. She left the restaurant alone, standing outside for a long time, lost in thought. She stood by her decision to divorce him, walking home with a heavy heart. Behind her, a car started its engine. Dong-hyun was inside. Just then, Tae-wook's phone rang. It was Yoon-ju. At the same moment, Dong-hyun accelerated, aiming for Hai-ran. Myung-woo, appearing out of nowhere, pushed her out of the way. Worried, he carefully escorted her home. Tae-wook, his wife on trial for murder, received a text just before the proceedings were to begin. "Your wife won't be making it to court today." A sense of dread washed over him. He called Hai-ran. No answer. Panic seized Tae-wook. He called Hai-ran repeatedly as he raced to his car. Just as he reached the parking lot, she answered. She was fine. Tae-wook breathed a sigh of relief. But as he hung up, Dong-hyun rushed toward him, screaming, "Die!" Before he could attack, Myung-woo appeared. kicking Dong Hyun to the ground, then raising a pipe and bringing it down hard. He wouldn't tolerate anyone harming Hai Ran. The veteran detective arrived at Hai Ran's apartment earlier, sent by Tae Wook to escort her to court. Before they could leave, Tae Wook called. It was Myung Woo on the line. He said, "Lawyer Kang is injured." Hai Ran froze, then raced to the hospital, the trial forgotten. All that mattered was Tae Wook's safety. Arriving at the hospital, she was near tears with worry. Seeing him unharmed, she rushed into his arms, her fear and anxiety pouring out. Myung Woo, watching from a distance, quietly slipped away. As he left, he encountered the veteran detective, who recognized him from the case years ago. He also remembered Myung Woo's connection to Hai Ran and gave chase. But Myung Woo was gone. Tae Wook and Hai Ran arrived at the courthouse, surrounded by reporters. Tae Wook held her close. The trial began. The prosecutor presented his case. Hai Ran and Kelvin had met privately before his death, and her brooch was found in his car. Furthermore, Yoonju's testimony confirmed their past relationship, a year-long affair before her marriage to Tae Wook. Kelvin, he argued, had used this information to blackmail Hai Ran, who, desperate to protect her image and her candidacy for the Blue House position, had killed him, staging it as an accident. Hai Ran insisted she was innocent, claiming their relationship was purely professional. The prosecutor smiled and called his witness, a park security guard. He testified that on the night of Kelvin's death, he'd been on patrol and had witnessed two men arguing. He recognized one as Kelvin. One of the men had pushed Kelvin, causing him to hit his head and lose consciousness. The man then dragged Kelvin to a car, driven by a woman, Go Hai Ran. Murmurs erupted in the courtroom. The prosecutor's smile widened. Tae Wook, recognizing Yoonju's trump card, called for a recess. During the break, Ji-won identified the witness as a former high school principal, whose corruption Hai Ran had exposed, costing him his job. He was likely seeking revenge. On the drive home, Hai Ran was despondent. Tae Wook remained silent. The second day of the trial arrived. Tae Wook displayed photos of the crime scene, asking the witness to mark his vantage point and the location of the assault. They were on opposite ends of the alley, over 100 meters apart. He then showed a photo taken at night from the same location. It was pitch black, obscured by falling snow. The witness couldn't have possibly seen the assault clearly, let alone identify the perpetrator. He stammered nervously. Tae Wook then revealed the witness's identity and his history with Hai Ran, suggesting his testimony was motivated by revenge. The witness panicked. Faced with this irrefutable evidence, the prosecutor had no rebuttal. The judge declared Hai Ran not guilty. As the gavel fell, Tae Wook's assistant cheered. Tears welled in Hai Ran's eyes, overwhelmed with relief. Tae Wook held her hand, his gaze unwavering. At that moment, a body was discovered in the river. Yoonju identified it as Dong Hyun. The veteran detective called Tae Wook, who didn't answer. He was staring at a traffic ticket, lost in thought. Hai Ran prepared champagne to celebrate. They promised to forget the past and start anew. She embraced Tae Wook, feeling a profound sense of happiness, tinged with a fragile fear of losing it all. The next day, the veteran detective visited Tae Wook, questioning him about Dong Hyun's death. Knowing Tae Wook had been attacked the day of Hai Ran's trial, he suspected Dong Hyun was responsible, and that Tae Wook was somehow involved in his death. Tae Wook claimed he'd simply fallen down the stairs and hadn't seen Dong Hyun. The detective knew he was lying, but without proof, he couldn't press further. The prosecutor, facing a lawsuit for fabricating evidence, tried to contact Director Kang, the man who had orchestrated the whole thing, but he was unavailable. He knew he'd been abandoned. Just as he was giving up hope, Hai Ran approached him. She knew Director Kang was behind the lawsuit and revealed she had substantial evidence of his crimes. If the prosecutor exposed their illicit activities, she was confident they could bring him down. She gave him a choice: face her lawsuit, or cooperate and help her take down Director Kang. Persuaded, the prosecutor resigned but vowed to expose Director Kang before leaving office. The next day, he raided Director Kang's office on corruption charges. Hai Ran prepared to expose him on television, allowing Ji-won to break the story. The primetime slot was no longer hers, but Ji-won's. After the broadcast, Hai Ran felt a sense of peace. She decided to step back from her career, focusing on the man she now realized she truly loved. At home, she discovered a traffic ticket among Tae Wook's belongings. Her blood ran cold. The location was just a kilometer from where Kelvin was killed, the time matching the estimated time of death. Stunned, her mind raced. Just then, Tae Wook arrived. She quickly hid the ticket, trying to appear calm, but he saw through her facade. He went to his room and found the ticket, now clearly disturbed. After a moment of panic, he pretended nothing was wrong, exchanged a few pleasantries with Hai Ran, and left with the ticket. He needed to dispose of this ticking time bomb. Hai Ran was in turmoil. If Tae Wook had killed Kelvin, why was her brooch in Kelvin's car? She distinctly remembered wearing it after returning home that night. But if Tae Wook had taken it, why plant it in Kelvin's car? She couldn't believe he would frame her. Meanwhile, Yoon-ju stood outside the network, holding a sign that read, Hai Ran is a murderer. She was still convinced of Hai Ran's guilt. Hai Ran's friend, Song Yi, unable to bear it any longer, confronted Yoon-ju. Yoon-ju described the dashcam footage of Hai Ran and Kelvin's meeting. The footage Tae Wook had deleted. Song Yi was instantly suspicious. Why would he delete it? While he might have wanted to protect Hai Ran from the revelation of their affair, the footage also proved she had no motive to kill Kelvin. As a lawyer, Tae Wook would have understood that. Determined to uncover the truth, Song Yi confronted Tae Wook. To her shock, he confessed to killing Kelvin. After Song Yi left, Tae Wook booked 2 plane tickets to the beach. In 10 years of marriage, he and Hai Ran had never had a honeymoon, rarely even spent time alone together. He decided to turn himself in, but first, he wanted to create one last beautiful memory with the woman he loved. Song Yi rushed to Hai Ran's apartment. Before she could get out of her car, a man attacked her. Hai Ran, learning of the attack, rushed to the hospital. Song Yi was in critical condition. The director arrived, informing Hai Ran that Song Yi had visited Yoon-ju before the attack. He also revealed that the veteran detective had visited the station, showing security footage of Tae Wook following Hai Ran the night Kelvin died. If he'd seen his wife meeting another man, the director reasoned, he would have been enraged, giving him a motive for murder. Hai Ran, reeling, confronted Yoon-ju, demanding to know what she and Song Yi had discussed. Yoon-ju recounted their conversation. Song Yi's suspicion of Tae Wook and her subsequent visit to his office. It was possible, Yoon-ju suggested, that Tae Wook had attacked Song Yi to silence her. Hai Ran vehemently defended her husband, refusing to believe he was capable of such an act. Tae Wook was the only person who had ever truly understood, supported, and tolerated her. Tae Wook returned home, finding Hai Ran asleep on the sofa. He clenched his jaw. He'd seen her meeting with Kelvin late at night, the brooch he'd given her, gleaming on her coat. He snatched it off, believing she no longer deserved it. His anger surged. He stormed out, encountering Kelvin, who was also leaving. Tae Wook's pent-up emotions exploded. He stopped Kelvin, not to physically assault him, but to warn him to stay away from Hai Ran. Kelvin taunted him, claiming that he and Hai Ran were truly in love and that her marriage was just a transaction. Kelvin's words struck a nerve. He was right. Hai Ran didn't love him, but hearing it from Kelvin was unbearable. Overcome with rage, he shoved Kelvin. He hadn't meant to kill him. Panic set in. To cover his crime, he drove Kelvin's car into a telephone pole, placing Kelvin's body in the driver's seat and staging it as an accident. In his haste, Hai Ran's brooch had fallen into the car. Tae Wook confessed everything to Hai Ran. She sobbed uncontrollably, consumed by a wave of resentment. Because of Kelvin's death, she had endured suspicion, scorn, and immense pressure. She broke down. "I wish you'd killed me instead," she cried, before fleeing the apartment. Tae Wook watched her go, offering no further explanation. He knew words were useless. He'd made a terrible mistake. But one thing was certain, he loved her. Hai Ran stumbled back to the station, weak and shaken, her makeup bag spilling its contents onto the floor. Myung-woo appeared, there to say goodbye. He was leaving, he explained, perhaps never to return. He told her he'd never regretted his decision 19 years ago, and would do it again. She deserved it. "Be happy," he said, before turning and walking away. Tae Wook sat on the sofa all night, finally at peace. He went to his office, gave his assistant the plane tickets he'd booked, and went home to have breakfast with his parents. Something he hadn't done in years. His father sensed something was different. Tae Wook confessed to the murder. His father's expression was complex. After a long silence, he simply said, "You fool." Song Yi awoke after a day and a half in a coma. Hai Ran had been at her bedside the entire time. Song Yi's first words were of concern for Tae Wook. Confused, Hai Ran listened, as Song Yi revealed Tae Wook's intention to confess. Hai Ran panicked, racing to find him. She finally reached him at an art gallery. They sat down at a nearby cafe. Hai Ran looked at him, her eyes filled with worry. Tae Wook appeared strangely calm. He simply asked her to sit with him and enjoy the moment. They might not have another chance. He apologized, then stood to leave. Hai Ran pleaded with him to reconsider, suggesting they take the trip first, then decide. Tae Wook walked into the police station. Hai Ran returned to the station, defeated. She typed out a breaking news alert for the director. The real killer of Kelvin is Kang Tae Wook, husband of former primetime anchor, Go Hai Ran. He has just turned himself in. She walked out of the office, returning to her desk. her heart pounding in her chest. Time crawled by. The director's phone rang. The killer had confessed. It was Myung-woo. Hai-ran was stunned. Myung-woo had beaten Tae-wook to the police station, confessing to the murders of both Kelvin and Dong-hyun. Tae-wook, standing in the station lobby, was in shock. His assistant handed him a letter from Myung-woo. Stay by Hai-ran's side. This is your penance. Tae-wook gave the letter to Hai-ran. She read it silently, then retreated to her room, her silent sobs echoing through the apartment. Time passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Hai-ran was hosting a new interview program. Her guest today, Tae-wook. On his way to the station, a thick fog obscured the road ahead, but he drove faster, tears blurring his vision. Hai-ran's program began. With Tae-wook still absent, she chatted with the audience. When someone asked if she was happy, she paused, unsure how to answer. She thought she had happiness within her grasp, but now her hands were empty. Just then, her assistant received a call. Her expression froze, and then she looked at Hai-ran. Tae-wook wouldn't be coming. Everyone makes mistakes, and eventually, they have to pay the price. But will they ever find happiness? This is the end of the movie. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great films. Goodbye and see you next time.